right, ladies and gentlemen, joining me now as my guest is Dr. Bona Cohen. He is with the National Center for Public Policy Research's Occupy DC events at Freedom Plaza. And the National Center obtained a 5-week permit from the U.S. Park Service that forces the Occupy DC encampment to share the park between February 12th and March 15th. Dr. Cohen received his Ph.D. from the University of München in Deutschland and is standing by as my guest. And really, this business of wind power, Dr. Cohen, it is so favored, although it is so inefficient, that whereas the oil companies have been indicted for killing 28 migratory birds which landed in some oil pits, these wind farms annually, we understand, kill 400,000 birds of all different types, and apparently they also cause bats to explode. Can you tell us why we are being so selective in our prosecutions here?
Well, Gordon, of course, you're absolutely right in pointing out that wind farms, along with certain other sources of energy, such as solar power and ethanol, and you name it, are favored by Washington. And the consequences of that, particularly with respect to wind farms, which is what we're talking about today, are absolutely horrendous. Here is an energy source heavily subsidized by the American taxpayer that produces roughly 3.5% of our energy, but does so at an enormous cost to wildlife. You mentioned the figure of 400,000 birds a year. We don't know how many bats are killed. The Game Commissioner for the state of Pennsylvania estimates that in that state alone, 10,000 bats are killed by wind farms. All the more absurd in Pennsylvania because Pennsylvania sits atop the Marcellus Shale Formation, and beneath that is the Utica Shale Formation, both of which contain incredible amounts of natural gas, which kills absolutely no birds or bats. So here we have an unreliable, because remember, wind power doesn't work if the wind doesn't blow, and every now and then the wind doesn't blow. So here we have an unreliable, unaffordable, hence the subsidy, because without the taxpayers forking over goodies to the wind industry wouldn't be in business. So here we have a completely artificial industry that is knowingly killing hundreds of thousands of birds and probably just as many bats every year in the United States. And that figure, 400,000, that's just in the U.S. Think worldwide. You must be talking about into the millions of creatures and wildlife that are killed as a result of this. And finally, this is getting the attention it deserves. And let's hope that as a result of what I sincerely hope is public outrage over this, that the wind industry is going to be subjected to the exact same treatment that the oil and gas industry, that landowners in rural areas are subject to, and other industries with respect to their coming under the purview of all sorts of wildlife protection laws, such as the Endangered Species Act, the Migratory Bird Treaty Act, the Golden Eagle Protection Act, because the birds that are killed here are being slaughtered on a daily basis. That's an absolute outrage.
Yeah, and one of the things that I don't see discussed is, the bats perform a function in keeping down the insect population.
That's exactly right.
And we're going to have an explosion of every different kind of winged pest going. if we keep killing the bats, because that's what they feed on.
That's exactly right. You start interfering with nature in such a way that you allow more insects. That's going to affect agriculture. That's going to affect the spread of disease, because bats are there for a reason. They may not be the most lovable creatures on the face of the earth, but they're performing a very, very valuable service. And as a result of our completely discombobulated energy policies, we are allowing this wanton slaughter of birds and bats to continue with an industry that we have been pampering for decades.
Yeah, I can remember when I was in prison, they had up at the top of the walls, they had these big, powerful searchlights and things, and the insects were attracted to that, and the bats were attracted to the insects. Those bats used to come in like Messerschmitts on those insects.
It was time to put on the feed, right?
It surely was. Well, I think the penalty that they seek to extract from the oil companies is 6 months in prison and $15,000 in fine per bird. Now, that's the oil companies. And can you imagine if they were to assess the wind industry, which is to say assess the taxpayer, the same thing for those big wind turbines.
Yeah, that's right. And now that this is being openly discussed, that we have a double standard here, we go after one industry for the inadvertent killing of a relatively small amount of birds and bats, while letting another taxpayer-supported industry literally get away with murder on a massive scale. Now the wind industry is saying, aha, if you subject us to all of these laws, well, that will be, from the standpoint of our business, unworkable. Well, if that is unworkable, then what kind of business are you in? Because the killing of these birds and bats is an absolutely predictable consequence of putting up what I might also add are these absolutely unsightly wind turbines all over the country. They defoul the landscape, the scenery. A lot of these things are put in places where they can pick up most wind. So what do? They put these wind farms in mountains. They're trying to put the things now all throughout the Blue Ridge Mountains, the Appalachian Mountains, out in the west. They're putting them up. They've been up there for a long time and higher things. And you look up, instead of having a beautiful view, you see these horrible things turning, producing no energy worthy of the name, by the way, making a huge amount of racket. And what we now also see is a movement to put these things offshore. So we're going to have wind farms well within the view of people standing on the beach. And what are they going to do there? Well, they're going to start slaughtering seagulls and other seabirds. It's completely predictable, and we're letting this happen.
Well, what I wonder about in the first place is why we even have a wind industry. It's not as if they contribute anything, to our energy pool. We have, with the Saudi Arabia of coal, we have huge amounts of coal. We have huge amounts of natural gas, and we've got huge amounts of oil that's available to us. Why do we need to put up all of these windmills to very little effect, but to disastrous effect upon wildlife and visual scenery?
Well, that's absolutely right. And the fact of the matter is we don't need it. It is a completely superfluous and absolutely harmful source of energy. Every wind turbine in this country could disappear tomorrow. In fact, that would be my idea of a green job. You want a green job? Go out and dismantle a wind turbine.
You're right about that.
Yeah, exactly. Get those things out. We won't miss them in terms of the energy because it can be easily made up by our abundant sources of, as you said, oil, gas, and coal, all of which can be operational at a much lower environmental cost than wind turbines. Wind turbines, the whole wind industry, completely artificial, is propped up by a subsidy called the production tax credits, 2.2 cents per kilowatt hour. And without that subsidy, that industry would fold up virtually overnight. Now, Congress, for once, and this is rather amazing, and I hate to say it, but almost without precedent, is on the verge of doing something good, that is not extending that tax credit beyond December 31st of this year. And the wind industry is scrambling now with every lobbyist, high-paid lobbyist you can imagine, roaming Capitol Hill, trying to convince members of Congress to extend the tax credit at least for one more year or 2 more years so that they can keep this whole scam going. And I don't know whether Congress is going to do that, because after we have seen all of the money that has been wasted dumping it on companies like Solyndra, the solar panel company that received over $500 million in a guaranteed loan courtesy of the U.S. taxpayers that went belly up, and other companies that Secretary Chu's Energy Department, in its infinite wisdom, has chosen to put taxpayers' money into. After seeing all of these boondoggles, Congress is at long last waking up and saying, wait a minute, why are we doing this? And I think one of the things that we can do that will really convince them that this nonsense needs to stop is to make the public aware of just how much harm this industry, this completely artificial, phony industry, is doing to wildlife, and how little energy it is producing in the process.
Well, Dr. Cohen, I think you're absolutely right, and I want to thank you for sharing your time and your insights with us, and I hope that we can look forward to calling upon you again in the future.
Well, I would be delighted to come back.
Thank you so much. Folks, I've been speaking with Dr. Bonner Cohen, and he is with the National Center for Public Policy Research. We're going to take a little break for the benefit of our advertisers, and I'll be right back.